Good morning, everyone. Welcome at our conference or to our conference. I am now going to tell you something about our latest developments at Checkmk. I'm just going to wait for the slides to show up. I'm not sure if you're able to see them. Here they are. Okay, great. The title page is here. Okay, so Jan already gave us a short introduction. He told us about our top priorities and also, just an overall idea of what's going to happen. And I'm going to give you some more detailed information. Before we get started, though, I would like to tell you a little bit about our development team and also what we're doing specifically. Just more detailed, I'm going to show you some more numbers. And Jan just showed us that our team at Tribe29 is actually increasing by a lot. And we also saw that, of course, all of this is happening within our developers as well. And of course, that also shows that we have a development in our commits and also the changes that we're doing in terms of our software. All of that is changing quite a lot. We're more people now. We're doing more. We're changing the software a lot more. We're implementing more features. And that's what this slide's supposed to show you. So this is just the number of changes and not specifically what we have changed and how you can benefit from it. But you can also see that on our next slide. So what you see here is, first of all, the development of our check plugins over time. So you can see this is almost from the beginning of Checkmk. There's a little bit more time before that, but it was a lot less back then, less development. It was a lot slower in terms of the development of checks. But now, if you look at the last 2 to 3 years, since 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, you can see that the growth is definitely increasing by a lot. And because we have more capacities in terms of developers, we're in a position where we can also just implement more features now. And we can also build new checks, and we can also implement new features in Checkmk. You can also see that looking at these figures right here, you can see the number of features that we've added between 1.6 and 1.7. So those are 320, a little bit more than that actually. And bug fixes, it was roughly 800 plus. So a lot of things have happened there as well. Those are fixes that were done in 1.6 and then they were ported to 1.7. So this is everything I wanted to tell you in terms of numbers, and now we can just look at all the big features. Oh, Lars, can we say that per feature we have 3 bugs apparently? No, we fix them. We don't put them in, we fix them. Somebody actually put them in there a few years ago. I don't know who that was, but you know. All right, let's get back to our agenda. So we have 5 points on here that sort of mirror all the points that Jan already started with just now. They're part of our big roadmap. And then we also have the topic of new checks and development of checks. And then we also have the topic for 1.6 going to 1.7, which is the Python 3 migration, so that technology change. So now let's get started with our user experience. That is actually the biggest project that we are planning on doing right now. So if you look at the release cycle, this is what we want to do. So we already sort of laid the groundwork for that. So it's a lot of different things that we're thinking about. And of course, we're thinking about it basically just making sure that we have a user concept and just making where we have important dialogues that we're reworking, etc. And of course, really just thinking about usability and things like that and concepts that actually make it where really all sides of Checkmk and the interface can be included. So that is something that we have started this cycle, and we've already implemented some important things, and that's also something that we're going to do over the next 1 to 2 years as well. So where are we at right now, and what's happening in terms of details, etc.? I'm going to... Well, Matthias is actually going to do that in a separate talk later on. So I'm just going to show you some specific measures that we are already implementing for 1.6 or that are going to be available for 1.7. So for the very first time, it's a couple of things in our graphing system. So in Checkmk Raw edition, that would be the enterprise edition, users already know about it. But in the Raw edition, it would be, well, for a long time, we have used Nagios as the graphic system. And for years, that was actually working quite well for us. But we noticed that with the Raw edition being sort of like an open source and really showing off our software, it's really not working the way we expect it to work. That's not what we want. And it's supposed to be be a very modern graphing system, and that's why we decided to build a consistent system for Managed Service Edition, Enterprise Edition, Raw Edition users, and we just wanted to make sure that it's the same graphing system. So parts of the Enterprise graphing is now ported into the Raw Edition. Not all features are included, though. So we just made sure that we have PNP of Nagios in terms of features is actually mirrored by our graphing system, but there are specific features, for example, like the custom graphs, combined graphs, etc. All of that is an exclusive Enterprise Edition feature, and we just kept that for the Enterprise Edition and Managed Service Edition. Now that we actually have the technology stack for our internal graphing, and that's been ported to the Raw Edition, it was very easy to do the Grafana integration, which you are using quite a lot. So we now made that available for the Raw Edition as well, and that is something that we've been planning on for a long time. But in terms of the technology, we're sort of tied to only making it available for the Enterprise Edition, but now it's also going to be available for the Raw Edition. Okay, and then Oscar last year, actually, he showed you a proof of concept, and that is that's the whole topic of analytics, and it's mainly two features that were excluded, features that are now going to be included in 1.7 or 1.6. They were partially already integrated in that, but it was just more complicated to use them. So first of all, that would be painters that are historic metric painters that you can use in order to just look at the development of a specific metric over time. So you can aggregate that to be a number. And what you see here, this is a view that was built for specific hosts. It's including 2 CPU metrics or 2 CPU painters and 2 memory painters. So they always show one metric, CPU and RAM, and then also specific periods of time. So I can see CPU utilization in percent across a week and a month, and those would be the individual hosts, and I can also parameterize that. So this is what you see with these colors. So the painter configure if it's supposed to show a state, so red, yellow, green, or if it's like it's on the right-hand side, if it's just a number without anything else to it. So you can configure that per painter, and of course you can just adjust it to your needs, respectively. That's the one feature, and then we also have the forecast graphs that I already mentioned earlier, and they were shown at the last conference, but now this is definitely part of our graphing system. It's integrated, and you are using the front end, which is the normal graph, which is what they look like in Checkmk, in order to show the information. And what's important here when it comes to these forecast graphs is that you also see more than just now. So it's just a prediction for the future. We have this green bar in the middle, and what you see here is that this is the state right now. The blue line that you see here is the recorded values, and then we also have the yellow area plus the red line, which is then a prediction for the future. And it's sort of based on the data of the past, and that's how the prediction is made. So looking at this graph right here, if I only look at the left-hand side, I can't necessarily see a trend. However, if I then look into the future and I draw that graph, you may see that this value is increasing slowly but steadily. And if you just look at a specific period of time, you may even see information that can be helpful in order to scale your system and also just build it up more before you have any serious problems. What you see here is the parameters of a graph like that. So first, I'm just going to select a metric. So you see that these graphs currently work for one metric per graph. Otherwise, it would just be too confusing. And then I'm going to select the period of time that I want to look at the past, so 1 year, 1 month, etc. And then next I'm going to choose the time period that I want to calculate for the future. And then I also have more parameters in order to tune this model if you want to and adapt it to your needs, basically. So partially also the uniqueness of the metric as well. And these parameters right here overall can then be used in order to tune these forecast graphs. All of this is fully integrated in our reporting system as well, so you can actually configure these graphs and then also implement them in reports. Which then brings me to the next topic, which is reporting. And again, we've done a lot in that respect as well. We made sure that the PDF reports, which are very, very technical, now have a few elements that are new, and you could need that for customer reports, for example. So it could be a table of contents, for example, which is very, very important. And you can use that if you just have longer reports, for example, if you have 10, 20 pages or even more than that, and all of that needs to be in one report, then it does make sense to have a table of content. Just a quick question. I got a question from Lance. Lance is asking, can you do yesterday to same day last week? I don't think so, no. Currently, it's really just about the time period from now on into the future or the past. Okay, we have a second question. Suresh is asking, can we also get the highest values of CPU usage and RAM usage? So the highest values. Okay, in order to just see if there are any deviations for several different systems or within one metric. I don't know, that's not my question. Of course, what's great about this online conference is that you can ask questions, but we can't ask back. I also would like to say, just for participants, we have a latency of about 20 seconds. So that means that whatever we are doing here, you see 20 seconds later. So it just takes a little while until we can answer your questions. Okay, that's why it's difficult for me to ask specifics. Okay, just about this question, though, I can imagine two scenarios. First of all, I show something about new dashboard features, for example, that could be interesting in order to just see some deviations for specific metrics, mainly if you have to compare different metrics, and also if you have a forecast graph, for example, and you just want to look at the max values of one metric, then you can also do that with this metric. Whether or not this is answering your question, I'm not exactly sure, but hopefully it does. Of course, we can also discuss it later on in our fireside or in a one-on-one, for example, as well. So if you have more questions, please schedule that. I have a question by Kai. Kai is asking a Grafana question. Will the plugin be extended to support templating for variables? It's not implemented in 1.6. Yeah, that would be very helpful. It would be. Whether or not that's going to be available and when it's going to be available, I don't know. We're going to have to see that in our roadmap planning. So far, we have not really planned on that for 1.8, but when it comes to Grafana connectors, we definitely do want to make some progress. Okay, great. Let's continue. Okay, great. All right, table of contents, we've covered that, and there were two more points. First of all, being able to also add a cover page. So now if you have reports for customers, for example, you can include the customer logo, your own text, title, etc. So that can be on a cover page in your report. And in terms of the content, what's new, and that's very, very interesting, I believe, is that you can also now choose individual elements in your report and also use different time ranges. That wasn't possible before. Before, you only could define one time range per report and all elements were in that time range. But now it's possible to have individual graphs for the same metric across specific periods of time. Specifically for the Managed Services edition, we also have made something that is very, very new. So it's very common that customer reports have to be created and that you also have customer-specific texts that need to be included in reports and also customer-specific styling in terms of the report. So what we have created is an option to build your mechanics centrally. So you choose the elements that you want to show in all the different reports for your customers or clients, and you can now make it where you just have a configuration of a specific customer template. You can determine, depending on the customer that you're creating this template for, you can also just use different templates per customer. Okay, now let's talk about dashboarding. So Jan already told you that we definitely want to improve, and the data we have right now needs to be presented in a nicer way, more structured, easier to understand, including more graphs, etc. And what we want to do is there are three main things that we want to do in order to improve our dashboarding. For 1.7, what we want to do is we want to work on new dashlets. That's what we're doing right now. I have some that I want to show you. And in addition to that, we're also working on making it where dashboard editing is a lot easier, more elegant, and also more seamless overall. And we also want to work on making sure that Checkmk also has more clearly structures visualizations that are available. So talking about these dashlets, the dashlets that we are implementing. So this is the single metric dashlet that you see here, which can be used in order to show key metrics. So let's say you have a dashboard for a specific system and there's one specific metric that is very, very important. And you can just use this dashlet for that in order to show it. And I can also configure it how it's supposed to be shown. Do you want to see a title? Do you want a background color? Should the background color be the same color of the current state? Do you not want any background color? Do you want the writing to be in a specific color? You can configure all of that. The size of the writing configures in line with the size of your dashboard, so it can be bigger, smaller, etc. And you can also have several of these elements in your metric. Okay, let's now move on to a dashlet that shows you data over a specific period of time. They're called bar charts right here. In terms of the technology, it's sort of like showing you the history. And on the bottom axis, you have the time period. And what you see here with this dashlet that you see in this screenshot, you see the service notifications that were sent by a Checkmk system. So you can see that it's not only one level of data, but we have two aggregation levels. So we have the big bars at the top. They show you a time period of 12 hours. And based on that, you can also see if there are any peaks or anything like that. And if there's anything interesting to you, you can also look at the bottom graph, because the bottom graph then shows you individual pillars, and that would be 1 hour. And you can also see some peaks there. So peaks that could happen within these 12 hours, okay? And then you can click on the individual pillars. And by doing that on the next side, you're going to see a lot of different events. And of course, you can analyze those further. So the next dashlet that we've built are these so-called scatter plots. And what we're looking at here, this is not just one metric, but we're looking at several different metrics, so many of them. In this case, it's CPU utilization of several systems, so again, over time. And what you see here is you can really use this dashlet for just deviations, okay? So you can build a median, etc., and then you can also see, okay, the individual dots on top of that over time, just deviations basically. And by doing that, you can really recognize anomalies, and you can also see why that happened. And again, you can click on the points again, you get detailed information. And on top of that, you can also click to the objects and do more of an analysis. So those are just 3 examples in regards to our version 1.7, but of course there are going to be more elements that are going to be included. Other than that, my second point is that it's supposed to be easier to build dashboards and edit them. In the past, what happened was when you were editing it, the dashboard, actually you opened it and you said, okay, I want to edit it, and then you delete a dashlet, you edit it, or you create a new one, and then you're just going to be redirected to a different page. So this is sort of difficult in terms of usability. And we definitely want to restructure that, and we want to make it where it's just a workflow where you are just on that dashboard the whole entire time and you just edit individual elements. So there are some first steps that have been taken for that. So the editing of dashlets is going to be implemented for 1.7. In terms of content, what was added is that you can now copy dashlets as well. That used to be a problem in the past, because if you had similar elements on your dashboard that you wanted to place, you just had to always do this configuration again and again. It was very prone to errors, but now you can actually build one graph, you can tune it to the way you want, and then copy the parameters. You can just change them slightly, and then you can continue on. When it comes to view dashlets, it's now possible to link existing views. The big benefit of that is that you don't only create a view and then you clone it to the dashboard and then you have to keep them synchronous, but you can now really reference this one view very easily and then just edit it. You can add things. So this is just then mirrored in that dashlet. So another big change, and one of the biggest changes when it comes to dashboarding in terms of the technology behind it, is the context-sensitive dashboards. So in the past, it was partially possible for individual dashlets, but now it's something that works generally. It's just a principle now. What's behind that is just that I have a dashboard that I can build with different elements, and you can do that, for example, for an ESX host. I can configure it in a way where you would just want to show ESX hosts in your dashboard. And as you can see here in the URL, you can now add different parameters. So at the moment in time where you have a host dashboard, for example, you have the mandatory parameter host, and that's how you define which host name or which host you want to use in order to show this dashboard. And then you also have optional parameters. In this case, it would be the service regex in order to filter all the elements on the dashboard. So all of that is now currently a situation where you have to find these parameters and then put them in a URL, you have to bookmark them, etc. So for 1.7, all of that is going to be dialogue-based. Means if I have a mandatory parameter, I'm going to access the dashboard without the parameter. I'm going to see a dialogue that's going to indicate that you have to type it in. Please select the host name, for example. Optional parameters are going to be just as easy to configure as well. Lars, I have another question. Kai is asking. And there are 2 additional votes, actually, for his question. So it popped up. The question is, a lot of customers of dashboards are at management. Of course, they like to see it on their mobile device. Could these dashboards be made responsive, so mobile supported? That's interesting. Okay. So that is not something we're specifically planning on doing. I wouldn't say, okay, we're definitely going to do it for 1.7 or 1.8. However, it is a very valid point. It's a good point. Responsiveness, etc. That is definitely a big topic that is being discussed again and again. And it's also definitely something that's being discussed within a UX project, and it's definitely going to lead to a decision. So far, I would say that we always thought that the Checkmk interface is very, very complex and is so extensive with different dialogues and complex configuration dialogues that it doesn't make a lot of sense to actually make it where everything is mobile supported. But for partial aspects, it could make a lot of sense. I understand that. There's also the mobile app that can be used for troubleshooting, for example, etc., or the mobile interface that's been around for several years already. But the question is, okay, are we going to focus on that or not? That remains to be seen. However, that's not an explicit point on our roadmap so far. I have another question. We have 7 votes on that. It used to be 5 just a few minutes ago. Lance is asking, does 1.7 have a target release date yet? It's a little off topic, but still interesting. Okay, I'm going to tell you more about that later. Don't you worry. I'm definitely planning on telling you. And then Ingo has another question, 3 votes. Idea regarding user experience of forecast graphs. If possible, make them available for users. Admin creates forecast templates like forecast 1 month or 3 months. User then clicks forecast 3 months. Then there are metrics, and after that the user gets a page with all the forecast graphs. So I think what he's saying is that this dialogue, in order to configure it, is very, very complex, and maybe by sort of splitting it up as an admin, you could make it less complex. So the user only sees the result, basically. Well, it's not as easy as that, to be honest, because the metrics are very, very different in terms of their behavior. And when it comes to the design of these things, you also always have to look at the individualized metrics and also how they develop. But overall, yes, it could be configured and it could then be made available to others. And you could then say, okay, you can use it. If you want a different metric, then you just have to select a different one. And the other parameters could be kept as is. Okay. Good. Talking about dashboards again. The third point is that we want more individualized and preset views in Checkmk. So one thing that we've done is with the Checkmk dashboard. So we have 2 that were implemented based on the context-sensitive dashboards. So I'm just going to click on right here. Oh, I have to do it for you. Oh, that's unfortunate. Okay, but great, thank you. All right, so this is just the entry point, Checkmk overview. So this is a dashboard with all the different servers that are recognized as being Checkmk servers. That's the top part. And then I also see some inventory information about the system itself, also how much RAM I have, etc. Also utilization as well. And then the second element at the bottom is also information about the individual Checkmk sites. So I can see what kind of version is running and... Oh, can we go back, please? I can also see the number of services. I can also see the helpers, etc. So I can sort of also just use it in order to get a good overview of the behavior of my Checkmk itself. So do I have to adjust anything in terms of helpers, etc. And I'm going to be able to click on that. I'm going to be able to click on a Checkmk server, and I'm then going to see a dashboard that is context sensitive, because that way I get data about the Checkmk server. So this is just an example. So this is using the dashlets that were available at that point in time. So the single metric dashboard, for example, or dashlet rather. And graphically, of course, we want to make it look nicer, but this is just supposed to be a tech preview. So you can see all the options that are available. The dashboard was created for a general Checkmk server, and then you can use parametrics in order to use all the Checkmk servers that you have. Okay, so also in terms of the configuration and your daily life with Checkmk, we're definitely working on that. It's not only just new shiny features that we're creating, but we have implemented something that's called text usage overview. So this is the next screenshot. So if I want to work on my tags, for example, if I want to learn where tags are being used, etc., then I can do that in my tag configuration now. I can access that and see in which folders, hosts, or rule chains a specific tag is being used. And then I can think about if I want to exclude this tag, for example, because it's obsolete and not being used anymore. I have a question. It's a little delayed because of the latency. It's about dashboards. Are there any plans to make public dashboards possible without authentication, that everybody can see using a link? No, we haven't thought about it, but it's definitely possible. Shouldn't that be possible today already if you know how to do it with an automation user? Overall, yes, but the problem with the automation user is that you then have to limit it a lot in terms of the rights. So it's quite complicated, but you could configure it that way, yes. And you could also do a how-to in the form of a video, for example, and just show how that's done. So, yeah, maybe it could be an expert video or something like that. Okay, great. All right, tags and labels. We have discussed that last conference already. We already talked about why we want to implement them, what the difference is between tags. Oh, well, tags have been around for a while, but we've implemented labels. And we also talked about what the difference is between tags and labels. And we really haven't shown you what they're going to look like. Many of you may have already seen it in the current Checkmk. And what you see here in this screenshot, this is just a view filter where you can filter by host labels and service labels. And you can also see a couple labels that have the CMK/prefix. Those are the ones that are using our Checkmk plugins, and they're automatically discovered. So if you have a view, for example, that's being filtered in a way that it only shows local nodes and also Docker images with 9.5, for example. On the next slide, you're going to be able to see additional labels that are going to be discovered. Kubernetes, for example, you can see quite a few labels that are being discovered. And overall, those are the labels that are natively in Kubernetes already, and they are just here in Checkmk because of our Kubernetes link. And another thing you want to add for 1.7 are labels for the operating system. So for Windows, Linux server, etc. So that way they can use their labels to just get more into Checkmk, what kind of operating system the host is using, basically. And since these labels are more and more common now, of course, we also want them in our system and also make them more usable. Right now, the labels are missing as conditions for notification rules. And for 1.7, we want to change that. And we also have a UX project. And we've learned from feedback that the discovery mechanics of labels that is currently on the service discovery side is not the best case scenario for us. It's not the best concept and also not the best implementation. And we're discussing it right now. We're discussing how we can actually implement the dialogue in general and also how we're going to proceed with labels. So for 1.7, that's going to happen. I have a question about dashboards. Again, Bernd is asking. 4 votes. Dashboards on a scroll bar. Do you have scroll bars or how do you handle that? Well, currently the basic concept of dashboards is that they're always fitting on one screen. So overall, you can say that they're meant to be built in a way that they actually fit on your screen, or different resolution and also different sizes, so they're just growing. And the dashboards, making them where you can scroll, that is something that we've heard quite a few times, to be honest. We also know that from other systems as well. That is also something that we have looked into in our UX project, and we're just trying to figure out how to find a good solution for that. Okay. All right, we're going to have to start with our next topic, cloud and container. Jan already talked about it a little bit, so I'm going to tell you a little bit more. So what we've done is, as Jan already said, we have done quite a bit in different areas. So let's talk about AWS first. In this case, we actually set the foundation already, and with 1.6, we actually have a very good AWS monitoring that has been established, and we also have we're now at a point where we can also add additional checks, and we can also sort of expand our portfolio when it comes to AWS. And it's definitely a lot order-driven, so users are using it, clients are using it, but need additional services. So we have Glacier, EC2, DynamoDB, ELB, the web education firewall we're still working on, and all of that is going to be available as a feature pack. It's going to be available. When it comes to Azure, we haven't done quite as much, to be honest, but still it is a very important situation when it comes to Active Directory Azure environment. We've implemented that as a check, and coupling that is actually meant to have user credentials that are internally in an enterprise environment and syncing that to the cloud. So that is being monitored right now. And when it comes to Kubernetes, we also have additional services that were implemented. So the Ingress objects are part of the monitoring now. And overall, those are objects that, or the configuration objects that make it where my cluster, my Kubernetes cluster, actually makes services available to the outside. So specific network services that need to be accessed from the outside. There are checks and inventory plugins for that. And I can see if my inventory plugin, I can see what's being configured. In my checks, I see their state, the state of the objects, and the same also holds true for Kubernetes jobs. When we talk about Prometheus, Jan already talked about that as well. So he told you what we've done, what our train of thought is in terms of details and the technology behind that. Tomorrow, my colleague Vontek is going to tell you more about that. And he's also going to introduce how everything's going to work, what kind of features are included, etc. The dynamic configuration at Checkmk is a core component when it comes to all these topics of cloud and containers. Dynamic configuration makes it where objects that are in any of these environments and they're configured, they're dynamically then included in Checkmk. And we have expanded that a little bit, so we have more tuning options available now, and that way we also have more security measures. For example, if an object is deleted somewhere, then it is not going to be deleted in Checkmk right away, but instead there is a short time period where the object is still going to be around, so it's still part of the monitoring. Maybe you deleted it by mistake, and after a specific period of time that you can configure, the object is then going to be deleted. The same holds true for the processing of piggyback data, because that is the data source for the dynamic configuration. So again, we have more configuration options as well. Getting back to dynamic configuration plugin API. So overall, that is also a programming API. The dynamic configuration is modular, so it means that you can also build your own connectors. And these connectors can then make it possible for you to also connect your own data sources, CMDD, for example, etc. So these API are then going to be documented even better using the Check API projects, etc. So we just want to make sure where we make them even more present in the future. Talking about network monitoring, that's one of our core competencies, and of course we're doing a lot in that area of expertise as well. So next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so we already heard Jan say that the NTOP integration, our user interface, has already been implemented. So many of these things have already been implemented, and you can also see that in our live demo later on. And I would say that we follow the approach that it's integrated fully in Checkmk, all the main elements of the interface, so that you're sort of like in an umbrella system. So that way, you can use Checkmk, you get NTOP information, and then if it's more detailed, you can also use this system or the interface of that system. So in times where the majority of colleagues in companies are using VPN to get into the system, VPN monitoring is a lot more important than it used to be in the past. So lots of business processes are then dependent on firewalls, etc. So we definitely put a lot of focus on these check plugins and driving them forward in order to just have more usable monitoring and making that available. And if there is anything that is not done yet, if there's anything that's missing, anything important, if there's maybe a gap in your monitoring or something like that, and you want to monitor hardware, software X, Y, just so you have a good overview of your VPN, let me know, let us know that we should do something in that regard that could be helpful to you. Of course, we definitely want to make that a priority. Other than that, when it comes to network plugins, of course, we've done quite a bit as well. So there are some companies that were included, and many of them have new product ranges, new software, etc. So this slide just shows you an overview of the companies. If you want more details when it comes to that, also check our works, because we have the Check catalog that is also going to show you what is being monitored in detail, what can be monitored, and you should definitely find all the things that we have implemented so far. Talking about automation, so let's say you just want an IT system, extensibility, etc. So really adjusting Checkmk to your needs. That's also a very big topic as well. And also when it comes to the development of 1.6, we definitely spend a lot of time on that. A very specific measure, which is the Agenty Bakery, is definitely big progress. So far, we always had agents in your network, and these agents then were communicating with the bakery, and they always had to communicate with the central side. That makes it where we have segmented networks. There are going to be big problems because they always have to communicate with the central point, and also it's a problem for worldwide networks because all agent updaters, regardless of where they are, if they're on the other end of the world or not, they always have to communicate with the central point, and that's a problem. So now we have a new situation because now the agents can also communicate with their local monitoring site, and that, first of all, is helpful because that way you have less network traffic within the network segment, and also the agent updaters are communicating with their site. The site then answers the questions that the agent updater has locally, as long as the information is available locally. If it is not available, then there's going to be a channel from that remote side to the central side, and the information is then being picked up and then being sent to the agent updater. The Agenty Bakery also supports local files in general in all plugins. That is something that we have integrated in our system. In the past, it used to be different because it was just individual plugins that were able to do it. And if you then wanted to adjust the local agent or individual plugins, then it was always sort of a matter of luck whether or not the respective plugin actually could do the local adaptation, know about it, and then also distribute it. But now, starting at 1.7, it's part of the system, and all the files that are implemented in Checkmk can be overwritten and then just be sent using the baked agents. When it comes to notification plugins, the integration of messaging services, for example, that we have WebEx Teams, and we are currently working on integrating Microsoft Teams as well. So there's a native notification integration for these two services. And one of the main projects this year is definitely going to be creating the new REST API. And what we want to do is we want to be a solution that can be integrated in an IT environment very easily using modern means in order to externally build your scripts and software, etc. And in today's day and age, the REST API is the means of choice. And in terms of the technology, we've already set the base for that. Christoph is going to show you some details in regards to that, and he's going to show you how this API looks, what it looks like, what kind of technologies we're using, etc. And he's also going to tell you about our roadmap and what's to come. Right now, we're in a position where the technology is there, and now we just have to fill it with life step by step. So including new calls, existing calls of the old web API has to be moved to the new API, and at one point in time, the old web API is going to be turned off. And I'm sure the biggest project and also one of the most important projects apart from the UX topic is also renovating our programming API, the plugin APIs. The most important API is our Check plugin API. And we have spent a lot of time to have a good API design, also to think about what actually worked well with the existing API, what doesn't work well, and what do we want to change with the new API, etc. There's some needs included of developers, in-house developers, also contributors from our community, etc. Also experience of more than 10 years Checkmk. So all of that's included in these concepts, and we are definitely on that. We are making it where we are creating this API. There are some portions of it that are built on this new API. And yeah, in regards to what it looks like, how it works, what it looks like for a Check developer, etc., Moritz is going to show you that. Another API and programming that's the inventory plugin API and the bakery plugin API. So in the past, they worked in very different ways, and we are going to adapt them a lot. So in terms of the way they look, etc., they're going to be very similar to the Check API. So that if you actually program in the different areas, you're definitely going to know your way around. They're going to be documenting in the same way, etc., so that everything is definitely nicer in terms of the user experience. Talking about our next hot topic, which is performance. Performance is always very, very important to us. And when it comes to that, you always learn new things, how you're using Checkmk, where you're using it, where it can be better in terms of scalability, etc., and how our system can be made more scalable in general from a system point of view. So what can Checkmk do on a specific hardware, for example, and from the user side, how does Checkmk really feel? What's the user interface? Is it performing well? Does it work fast, etc.? So I would say in terms of scalability of the system, we have a very important change that's to come. We've learned that when it comes to all the performance tunings, there's always a problem in regards to really just having to deal with RAM and so on, and using a lot of memory specifically. So we want to split all of that in two different portions, and the problem then is not as severe anymore. We may even be able to solve it. So we just want to split up in processes that are responsible for gathering data, because they actually don't need a lot of memory usage. So what's really important is that they can also wait for network I/O. So if it's communicating with a device and they're gathering data and the device is not answering and have a timeout of 60 seconds, for example, then these 60 seconds is just time that you have to wait. While you're waiting with this new architecture, you're only using very, very little memory. In the past, it used to be a lot because the Checkmk helpers were blocked. And since the fetchers don't need a lot of memory, we can actually start a lot of them. And that really doesn't do anything to the system in terms of performance. The second level, or the second component of this chain, is going to be the checker, which is really getting all the monitoring information, and which was produced by the fetcher, then really getting check results for the monitoring core. So these processes are going to still need a lot of memory, as they do today as well. But since they're not blocked by waiting periods, they can calculate the whole entire time. So they can do it as quickly as possible. As quickly as they get monitoring data, they can produce results. So if we just look at these two different pools, we can definitely scale everything a lot easier in terms of memory, etc. And that way, it's just much, much easier. Okay, when it comes to the user interface, so what does Checkmk feel like? How fast is it? If I'm working with it, with the web interface, for example, that's one of the most important workflows is activating changes. So let's say you have a host and you're monitoring, you have to activate changes. So you're configuring a rule chain, you always have to activate it as well. So all of that is happening again and again. And what we've noticed is that the way we actually distribute the configuration in distributed environments, there's a snapshot, for example, that is then going to be synchronized, and it's then going to be unpacked, sometimes with a lot of different files. So if you, for example, have different folder hierarchies and also big files or folders, for example, if you have packages with a lot of files in it, then it can be quite time-consuming to actually replicate that again and again. And what we have done here as a solution, or what we're planning on doing, is that the synchronization is going to happen in increments in the future. So right now, we actually are sort of cleaning that up behind the scenes, and we're doing all the prep work that needs to be done. And starting at 1.7, this activate change it is going to happen in increments. So central side and the remote side are going to exchange information, and they are then going to figure out what needs to be updated. And then there's going to be one or two files that are going to be replicated that need to be updated. Just a few more details that we actually have noticed in support of Checkmk is that you are building your software, you make sure that it's scalable, and that in reality you can maybe figure out that the system can scale very differently than you thought. There are some environments where there are hundreds, folder levels, and so on. There are some systems where there are a lot of folders on one level even, when it comes to the configuration, obviously. And of course, there are some systems where there are several thousand users in the user interface, etc. And that's how you really always learn when you do performance analysis and support, how you can scale a system like that. And you can also see that you can just take small measures and really make a big difference for all different users. So what we've done here is, for example, we've worked on the configuration to evaluate rules a lot faster, and also working with a lot of folders, and also making it where you can really find rules faster, making that more performant. Okay, so that was everything I wanted to tell you in regards to our major topics. I would now like to talk about one hot topic, which is new checks. What has happened here? To be honest, this is just an overview as of right now. During our last conference, we showed you that we actually are doing a lot when it comes to application monitoring, and that we also want to implement big data tools and monitoring for DevOps tools. We wanted to create that, and we actually have done a lot, to be honest, when it comes to modern databases, DevOps tools, for example. We have Jenkins monitoring. That is something that's quite extensive. Then monitoring drops, nodes, metrics are being recorded. It's quite helpful to analyze whether or not during the development stage the stability of specific jobs decreased, for example, because there were tests that aren't stable anymore, etc. So that means that all of these tools, we actually focused on the detail work, and we also actually were working with these tools ourselves, and that's how we learned a lot. So application monitoring is definitely something where we made great progress. Also, when it comes to infrastructure monitoring, we also have the network in there, right? So we already saw that earlier. So it's also about storage systems, operating systems. It's also about hypervisor, containerization platforms, cloud infrastructures. And overall, we have definitely done a lot in regards to that, and the portfolio has been extended by a lot. We can't talk about everything in detail because it is a lot. And like I said, you can look at the Check catalog, the different werks, if you want to see more about specific areas. A special topic for 1.6 is definitely Python 3 and its migration. That's one of our main topics in terms of the technology. Behind the scenes, it was definitely very, very time-consuming. And if we do everything properly, nobody's going to even notice that we did it. The job when it comes to all of that was really just making it where the whole Checkmk with about 750,000 lines of Python code, 2.7 actually. So really making it where it's just transferred from one programming language to the other. It's not only just switching versions that we're doing here, just saying, okay, I'm just going to adapt 5 lines and that's going to be running with a new version, but instead the languages are not compatible. And there are some things that you just have to rework in terms of your code base in a way that in extreme cases, you actually have to go through it code line by code line in order to have a proper migration at the end of the day. So that is something that we were aware of right from the beginning. We knew that it was going to be difficult based on the code base that we had and also based on the years of development time that it took to do all of that. And September is when we started with this topic, I would say. And we then really just read a lot about it, books. We also read success stories by other big projects and companies, etc. We also thought about what can we apply to Checkmk, what can we adapt, and so on. So we just started with our first scripts, so 100 lines of code and so on. So we just looked at all the pain points, what works well, etc. While we were doing that, we also started to sort of create our own cookbook with little recipes in it, really. So let's say you encounter a problem, how do you solve it? We then really looked at our library functionalities. So we just made it Python 2 and 3 compatible. Those are components that are really used by the whole entire Checkmk system. So all the different components have to be able to load that at any time. That's why they have to be compatible with 2 and 3 at the same time. And we then started to really change the code base with mechanical changes. We started to renovate it, basically. Those are changes that you can actually look at independently of the actual migration. We also definitely did a lot of testing, linting, and so on. So we definitely spent a lot of time on that. We then also tried to introduce MyPy very, very quickly, just so that the majority of the code base of Checkmk is now in different types. So that's definitely a quality assurance measure that makes it where we definitely aren't going to have a lot of problems when it comes to that switch. And then we just continued on. We just had some simple check plugins and then more difficult components, special agents, event consoles, live proxies, etc. So all of that are just isolated components that you can just migrate independently or separately. And at one point in time, which was probably about April or something like that, we then migrated all the big blocks. So we just decided that the Checkmk base, so the check engine, so the component that is producing the check results is going to be migrated. Of course, all the different checks are attached to that. So it's just a green check at this point in time. So this means that the migration of these components is done for Python 3. So all the checks, 1,800 checks that we have today were migrated. And because of that, we are very, very successfully done with it. And we can now have Checkmk check plugins with Python 3. So currently, we also have another block that we're working on, and that would be the Python 3 migration of the user interface, our GUI. And we are definitely on track when it comes to that for 1.7. So that means that the migration is going to happen by 1.7, at least we're pretty sure. And once we're done with all of that, we are going to really delete Python 2. So for 1.7, we're going to be on Python 3. So that means we're going to have the latest version of that programming language. We're going to be very modern, and it's definitely nice features that we are going to be able to use for this language. And that's going to make our life with Checkmk and also the development within Checkmk, but also plugins, etc. All of that is going to be a lot easier as well. And of course, we can also say that this is now a step towards us staying modern, up to date, and also having a good technological base. Okay, so this is everything I wanted to tell you about the Python 3 migration. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of questions now. Yes, I do have a few questions for you, and some of them have a lot of votes. So the voting system works quite well. So one person asking a question, other people can say, oh yeah, true, I want to know that too. And also that is really the order we're going to ask the questions in, okay? So one question, 10 votes. Christian is asking, When are the piggyback data for several sites going to be available? I know that we're working on that. I was always against doing that, but as you can tell by the votes, this is a feature that a lot of people are looking forward to. Yeah, that is going to happen because of a client request, actually. In which way and when that's going to be available, I can't say right now, to be honest. So I think we're planning on doing that for 1.7. It's possible that it is going to be a little bit later. I'm not exactly sure. Okay, do you have some kind of idea how that's going to work in terms of the technology behind it? Yes, we were thinking about different approaches, and we've discussed it a lot. So the most promising approach being that it could be a type of special agent and collecting everything centrally from the remote side, and then making it available there. So whether or not that is going to continue, saying that you then really push it to remote sites or something like that, that remains to be seen. Maybe there are going to be different levels to it as well in terms of our implementation of everything. Tim, you also have a question. You are the winner of the day. We have 18 votes for your question. Are you planning on having a URL shortener? Because sometimes the links are just too long. Yeah, that's interesting. I think first and foremost we would have to think about whether or not you're working on the length of the link itself, and then maybe leaving out different things in URL. Use, for example, we see that quite often. You just click on filter, and then all of a sudden, out of all the filters that are shown in this view, the URL variables are included, all with their different default values. Of course, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So when it comes to this filtering option, we're going to work on that because of our UX concept. Because of that measure, indirectly, at this point, the number of URL variables is going to be reduced to the relevant ones. Okay, there's another question. Michael Frank is asking. Hi, Michael. The question is, are US labels with inventory data, is that going to be filled with that, or are they independent of them? That's definitely the base, or at least partially. So we do have the hardware-software inventory that knows exactly what kind of operating system is being used, at least on Linux and Windows. We know what kind of operating system, what kind of version, etc. is being used. And of course, when it comes to a label like that, we have to decide what kind of information we are going to include in the label. So I can write US, or what do you say specifically? Is it enough if you say Windows, or do you also need the version, or should it be a separate label for that, just so you're more flexible in terms of your conditions as well? That's a matter of design at this point in time, and what that's going to look like at the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure yet. However, what is clear is that the same data source is going to be used as for the hardware software. Okay, but am I right? The service discovery also gives you the option to create host labels, right? But they're independent of the inventory. They would also work without using inventory? Well, depending on where they're from. Well, if they're from there, well, there are no labels from the hardware software inventory, that just using the same data. So you do have a check plugin that is discovering host labels. It may not even have a check function, but it does need some kind of source of information, right? And it's usually the agent section that is being produced by an agent. Either you produce it yourself or by way of a hardware software inventory agent plugin. Okay, so in terms of the technology, you could also work without the hardware software inventory, and you could also create your own labels using check plugins. Yes, Docker plugins do, then Kubernetes, and all of them do it. But the inventory plugin itself is quite difficult in terms of runtime. You have to deploy it, etc. So I understand that some people don't want to use it, but they can still create labels. But some of them may be missing that we have as a standard, right? Yes, correct. Okay, then I have another question about activate changes. Marcel is asking, when it comes to activate changes, there's supposed to be a possibility to only see the changes of one user and activate that. In the past, some colleagues had some problems because of that. That's a question that we've heard quite often. We also had some discussions about that. Yeah, there are different ideas when it comes to that. So, talking about 1.7 at this point in time, I don't think there's going to be a change, but Matthias is very sad about that because that was one of his main things. Well, we're going to have to discuss that. That's a feature that I wanted. I really wanted it. Okay, it should be our top priority, I understand. Well, maybe I can just tell you something about my favorite feature. Yeah, sure, go ahead. So the idea is that we recognize that activate changes per user is very, very complex. So we actually wrote some concepts about that, and it's quite difficult, I understand. We found out a solution that would solve 90% of the problem. It's a lot easier and also has other benefits. For example, you can activate changes per folder. So if you assume, and clients are confirming that most changes are mainly about adding hosts and services, it would be a way to say, okay, you can just have one way-to folder and you can just activate changes. That could happen quite quickly because it's just part of the configuration. And the likelihood of another user getting in your way is a lot smaller. That was the reason why I was looking forward to it. But I can also see that it's not trivial when it comes to the implementation, even though it's easier than the original concept. Absolutely, yes. But it's still a good idea, no doubt, but we just have to see how we're going to actually include it in our development. And when it comes to this change, it would definitely make it where a main portion of the changes that users are making. Yeah, I know, it's a lot of coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? Yes, a lot of woulda, shoulda, coulda, no doubt. Yeah, I definitely want this feature to be released. Maybe a little bit later, but it will be released. Okay, there's another question. Kai Goschert. The environment looks different for every customer. A lot of folders, few folders. Sometimes it'd be good to have best practices so you don't have to try out everything yourself. Structures, host groups, etc. Yes. We could actually have an expert video for that. You're looking at me because you think I should. Yeah, best practices is very important. Our consultants know a lot, and they know that for a lot of environments, they know a lot about things that work, that don't work, etc. And that knowledge is definitely there, and maybe it could be passed on to the community. Maybe we can have articles or videos or something like that. It would definitely be a possibility to actually, spread that knowledge. It's definitely a very good and important point, and what I want to avoid is that we introduce best practices that don't apply to everybody or aren't relevant, but maybe we're going to do a video where we just have a discussion among our consultants where we can just introduce different options or something like that. Okay, how much more time do we have for questions? 12 minutes. Okay, great. Okay, so please go ahead and ask if you have more questions. I already answered this one. Let's see. Well, there's one more topic I'm going to bring up. I was hoping you would, but you didn't. When it comes to the Python 3 migration, I said that Python 2 is then going to be just gone and it's just not going to be here anymore. And I was hoping that somebody's going to say, oh, what's going to happen with my tons of Check plugins that I have developed? Are they not going to work anymore? And of course, they're still going to work. And during our last conference, we also talked about the fact that we may have a compatibility layer that we're going to include in order to make it where the old checks can still be used seamlessly. We decided against that, though. And the main reason for that being is that we decided that we have 1,800 Check plugins. And within just a few hours, we were done with that migration. And it was very, very few and mechanical changes that we had to do. Some things that just led to runtime errors or things that you just had to pay attention to at the point in time where you just carry out the code as a Python 3 code. And for our release of the first beta version, we are going to make a how-to available. It's going to help you figure out all the main steps of the Python 2.7 plugin to the Python 3 plugin. So we definitely want to help you. We want to support you. And we also want to make it where it's as interactive as possible. So we can just work on that. We're also going to show you how to do it. And then hopefully using our portal or maybe also interactive sessions, we're going to support you when it comes to this migration. There are two more questions about labels. Christian is asking, are the labels with 1.7 going to be also handed to the notification environment? That shouldn't be a big deal, should it? Yes, correct. So when it comes to a complex systems like the Checkmk and really making it where it really gets through everything and really being integrated everything, it just takes a little while. And as I already mentioned, of course, we want to allow it as a notification condition. And if we're doing that already, of course, it also makes sense as a notification context. Okay, a second question about labels. Gerd Stolz is asking, will you also support labels in BI? as conditions for the BI configuration. Yeah, it does make a lot of sense, definitely. So I would say that's definitely a step that we are going to take. Currently, the tag configuration is sort of a little bit different now. So in Checkmk 1.6, we had the tag configuration in the rule chains that were modernized, but not in the BI. And the next opportunity where we can actually approach the BI is when we have the REST API. So it's going to be possible with the REST API, so you can configure the BI. And at the point in time where we're doing that, we're going to have to make sure that the data structures that are sort of under the BI configuration are going to be better and easier to understand, also easier in order to maintain them. So while we're doing that, we're also going to use the conditions of the individual BI elements, and we are going to adapt it to what we are doing with the rule chains right now. And at the point in time where it's sort of under it in the data structures, in the program code, etc., it's going to be very easy to then also add the labels additionally. A question from Jan. There are a lot of plugins of users that are more extensive than the Checkmk ones. How can we actually get all of them in Checkmk? Well, the plugins or the selection or collection of well, you know what? You can ask me all the questions, but I don't know the answer. Feel free to ask me, but I cannot give you the answer. So 20 seconds latency is quite a lot. So just imagine that we are as far away from you as the moon is from the Earth, so it takes a while. Okay, I'm just asking to make sure that you understand what I understood, So the message stands. We want to support. We know that it's a compatible change. We do know that porting 2.7.2.3, so the programming language change, but also for the Check plugins, porting it to the next Check API is a little bit more difficult. It's not necessary for the next version, but it's definitely something that we recommend because the old Check API is not going to be relevant anymore. It's going to be excluded, and then it does make sense to port all the checks in time. So, I mean, we have incompatible changes that are affecting the most important interface, and we do want this to work well. We want to support you, we want to help you, we want to make sure that the plugins are going to be ported to the Exchange, and the plugins that are going to be out there, they need to be ported. Of course, we can't program everything ourselves because we are not enough people to do that, but at least we can actually help you up to a point where we can transfer as much knowledge as possible, and we can also assist you if there are any problems. And that is the main message. We definitely want to do that. We want to support you, and we just have to figure out how that's going to work. Lance also has a question about the templates and dashboards. Possibly we've already answered it, but maybe we just talk about it again. Can I, for example, set up a dashboard showing various system metrics and then change the host dynamically it applies to? So the way I understand the question is that he has a dashboard and he wants to switch the host that he sees in the dashboard. Overall, those are the context-specific dashboards that I was talking about. So I can have a dashboard with one host, you can build that, and then later on you can also access it with a different host later on. And that way the metrics of the other host can be shown. Okay, great. I'm very happy that there are so many questions. The next question is by Guido about the agent updater. CME, the configuration of the agent updater is done right away because it's a side server and this is how it's shown. So how is that different? We're talking about the service edition, CME, and the combination of the agent updater is being run right away for all customers. Is that correct? Now I get it. Okay, so you have one general configuration for your agent updater, a rule, for example, and you then replicate this agent to the system, and the agents then are running on the systems. And we do know, however, which site they're registered with, or they may also know which site they're being monitored with. So it's sort of that link that does exist, and the agent updater does know which bakery or which bakery proxy it needs to communicate with. So it gets the information that in the future it needs to talk to this remote site. And starting then, it starts building the connection to this remote site. And how that works internally in detail and what you have to do being a user if you have an existing configuration, which is where you start, that's being described in the work that belongs to this topic and also in the user handbook as well. So if you just want to build a setup from scratch. I have another question from Christian Michaelski. Are you planning on doing the agent plugins earlier? Some Unix systems are only installed with Python 3 with our clients. Even though I heard you say that for 1.7, the Python 3 migration already happened, right? So that's why this topic is covered, right? Well, on the agent side, we have a very different problem than on the Checkmk server side. On the Checkmk server side, we can define what the Python environment needs to look like, which version, what kind of plugins, etc. On the agent side, however, we currently don't have any power to do that. We just have to use whatever exists, if it's a Python 2.5 or Python 3.8. We never know exactly, and you just have to be able to respond to everything. At least in our existing architecture, with the agent, we do not deliver a separate Python. In Windows, that's going to be the case, though. But on a Linux system or also a Unix system, in the near future, what's going to happen is we have the system Python and the modules that are going to be used. And with 1.7, we are then going to have compatibility, meaning that you can configure centrally in the bakery what kind of Python exists in the system. So that means you have Python 2.5, so you need the legacy plugins. Or you have Python 2.7 or 3.8, then you're going to need the current plugins. And the Agent Bakery is going to make it where all the corresponding files are then going to be there. Okay, there's another question in regards to Python 2. And I think we've answered it in part, but I forgot about it too. Would it be possible to keep Python 2 available in 1.7 in order to give users more time to convert their own plugins? Well, of course, we considered that, and we decided to not do that because it's very trivial. So I can just tell you it's very, very easy, and you don't have to spend hours and days reprogramming everything. It's really just mainly due to the nature of the Check plugins. When it comes to the Check plugins, we have a specific type of code. We don't have a file I/O. We don't have a very complex programming or anything like that. So overall, it's just data in, so check parameters and raw data, and then also check results out. And that's one feature that does something with the data and then creates a check result. And that's code that is actually really not affected very much by the Python 3 migration. So that's why we really don't want this compatibility. And we want to give you help, obviously, to take this step. And again, I would like to mention that this is one step you have to take towards 1.7, and another step is going to be the new Check API, and the new Check API is going to require some more time. And that's the mode that we have in order to get to 1.7. And to be honest, I'm not worried about having any serious issues when it comes to the Python 2.3 migration when it comes to checks. There is another question of a user that's been using it for a long time, which is me. How likely is it that my Check plugin is just going to work without me having to do anything? Well, I didn't calculate a number, but just your gut feeling. I would say my gut feeling is that our base code was switched and we really spent a lot of time on the program code, weeks. And then when it came to the checks, of course, we have 1,800 Check plugins, so it's quite a lot of them. But if you cluster them by type of change, for example, it's always the same thing again and again. Okay, is it possible that I have a Check plugin that just works? Yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's not even unlikely, to be honest. We had hundreds of Check plugins that just worked. Okay, so probably simpler plugins, the less complex it is, the more likely it is that it's just going to work like that. Yes, correct. That sounds good. Okay. Are there any more questions? I do have more questions. Robert Sander has a question. Robert, you're very, very active when it comes to writing your own check plugins. So how are pull requests or GitHub prioritized internally? That's interesting. So they're prioritized in a way that we are trying to work on all of them, just as we do with all our tickets and feedback mails, etc. But we are sort of in a situation where we have to see what we do. And of course, we also have some very useful changes that happen. We definitely want to make sure that's always part of our development workflow internally. Internally, we're working by Scrum, so we have 2-week sprints, and for that time, we just plan our tasks. And we also use one entry channel, and that's the pull request. However, I have to tell you that because of our roadmap that we have, and also because of our client orders, etc., we don't have endless amounts of capacities for these pull requests, but it's kind of limited. And of course, we just have to make sure that we find a good balance between all of these different tasks and just make sure that we do whatever makes sense. But of course, what we want is we want to consider these changes, and also simple changes. We want to implement them as quickly as possible. And if it's more complex, where we just have to do reviews, etc., we are going to do that as well. We want to do it as well. We want to always keep up with everything, because I know it's a lot of work for many of you, and you are also just putting your changes up there. And we definitely see that a lot of people put a lot of effort into them, but we also see that for a lot of reviews, we just have to help as well in order to make it where they can be an actual product. And that's definitely time consuming. And yeah, I can just tell you that what we want is we want everything to be treated great, to be maintained, etc. And we're working on contribution guidelines in order to make it where the expectation is a little bit more straightforward. So what do we expect from you? What can you expect from us? And that's something that we started doing, and we definitely want to continue with that. And we also want to make sure that everything just works better overall. Okay. All right. I would also like to let you know we have about 4 minutes left. We have 22 questions in our Q&A. We have some time to vote on the most important questions. We have maybe enough time for 1 or 2 more questions. So please do vote. Gerald has a question. He's number 1 with 8 votes right now. Is there going to be a qualified statement in terms of security, CS benchmark? Do you know what that is? Have you heard of that before? I have not. To be honest, I don't know what that is in detail, but maybe we can talk about that separately. I would like to know what you mean by that, if you need it, if you think it'd be nice, etc., and then we can just see. Okay. Martin Fredenhagen is asking, are you going to rework the agent updater? So with a type of calendar and just more organizational possibilities so that I can have test systems and no updates overnight, for example. Don't we have things like that already? Isn't there a rule set where I can determine all of that? Well, yes, you can use this dialogue, the control center really, where you control which systems an update is going to be delivered to. You can actually already differentiate between a test and pod system. Can I also work with tags? Yes, you can work with tags, I think also with folders. And you could also just do a timing where you say, okay, you're also going to do it automatically by time, switch it on or off or something like that. That could be an expansion of a parameter. Okay, so if I understand you correctly, that's it. That was the final question. Yes, so we're done with the session, but there is going to be the Q&A session where you can ask more questions, and there's also going to be a slot for development, I think. Yes, Ask Me Anything is what it's called. So I'm going to be back. We are going to be back, and we can continue then. Yeah, Lars, thank you very, very much. And also thank you very much to all of you for all of your questions and for participating and contributing. I'm very happy that this conference is still very, very interactive. That's really what we were hoping for. And yeah, Lars, thank you so much. And the next presentation is going to take place at 11:30, and it's going to be in English.